welcome back. This is part 2 of the Lurking Fear by H.P. Lovecraft serialization read-along. Basically, the story was published as a serial in the publication Homebrew. I'll put up the schedule that the story was published. I do have a playlist that this will go in, and I have an intro video as well as a part 1 video. This is part 2. So if you haven't read the story or you haven't seen the earlier videos, you might want to before watching this one. As with the rest of the story, I am reading The Lurking Fear in the second volume of the new annotated H.P. Lovecraft Beyond Arkham. It's edited by Leslie S. Klinger. But The Lurking Fear is in the public domain, and you can find it for free online. You can find it. It is, I guess, it's one of his not major works that is collected a lot in his in the various collections of Lovecraft stories. Also, besides being an attempted YouTuber, I am also a horror writer. Right now, I am regularly publishing short horror stories on my Substack. I'll put the link in the description. I would love anyone to check them out. Let me know what you think. If you're a fan of Lovecraft, if you like the video or you like The Lurking Fear, please give me a like, let me know down below, and subscribe for more videos. I do talk about mostly horror, sometimes horror movies. I recently ranked all of the Friday the 13th videos. I may also occasionally talk about a story or book that is not horror, but 90% of my content will be horror fiction. So please subscribe, like, comment, let me know what you think. Thanks. Another note I want to bring up before I get on to the story is that in Homebrew, The Lurking Fear was illustrated by art by Clark Ashton Smith. I'll be putting up some of the art pieces throughout the video. Many of you will know Clark Ashton Smith is considered one of the big three of Weird Tales, along with Robert E. Howard and H.P. Lovecraft. He was also an artist, sculptor, poet. The art pieces I'm seeing for The Lurking Fear, a couple of them are really cool. A couple of them just look kind of goofy. But either way, I'll put up the CAS artwork for The Lurking Fear that you see in this video will be from the second edition of The Lurking Fear. All right, part 2 was titled The Passer in the Storm, or rather, A Passer in the Storm. It's very windy here. I don't know if that's being picked up or not, but I apologize for that. I'll try to edit out what I can. So part 2, A Passer in the Storm, was published in Homebrew in February of 1923. Now, of note, this is Lovecraft's second serialized story for Homebrew, the first one being Herbert West Reanimator. And in Herbert West, HPL had to summarize the story up to that point in the following section. So it makes it a little bit tougher to read. It's a little bit more clunky, a little bit more onerous to get through, as he's constantly reiterating what happened before. He did not have to do that in The Lurking Fear. In Homebrew, the editor actually summarized the previous sections prior to the start of Lovecraft's work. So it definitely makes The Lurking Fear a little bit of a smoother read, a little bit more enjoyable in my opinion, rather. Isn't that great? So part 1 ended with the narrator waking up in the Mortent's mansion. A bolt of lightning. Both of his comrades are dead, and he sees a grotesque shadow on the fireplace, and that's how it ends. So we actually do not see him escape. Part 2 starts after his escape. It starts out with him spending several days lying in bed after escaping. He actually says after that, "I do not remember exactly how I managed to reach the motor car, start it, and slip unobserved back to the village." All right, so the narrator enlists one of the local reporters he had met in the area, Arthur Monroe, to help him in his investigation. Now, they decide to stay away from the Mortent's Mansion and Tempest Mountain for the time and invest more in the surrounding areas, including the Squatters Village, where the massacre took place in part 1. That's where a lot of part 2 takes place. Another thing that happens that is hilarious is our narrator is dealing a lot with the squatters or the mountain men of the area, and just every time he mentions them, it's almost like a backhanded takedown. Like he's talking smack, but he's also talking about how helpful they are in the investigation. I'm going to read what I think is the funniest takedown of the squatters. So he says, simple animals they were, gently descending the evolutionary scale because of their unfortunate ancestry and stultifying isolation. That's hilarious. And there's stuff like this all through part 2. It's just every time he talks about the locals or the squatters or the mountain folk or whatever, there's something like, they're gently descending the evolutionary scale. And it was hilarious. As I said, they're really focusing on the village where the massacre took place in part 1. So this village is in an open area, kind of halfway between Cone Mountain and Maple Hill. I think it's a little bit closer to Cone Mountain, actually. It does overlook Tempest Mountain. Again, Tempest Mountain is where the Martins mansion is. So, but they're investigating this village a lot, and they come to believe about the creature that they call the lurking fear, that it is a living organic creature. It's not some sort of spirit or anything like that. It is organic. They also believe that it's most active during storms. It's my understanding that something about, like, the narrator thinks that the lightning kind of startles it out of its den, and so it's running wild across the mountainside. So while they're investigating, they're also waiting for a storm to appear. And for a while, it doesn't. Now, finally, in sort of mid-October, they do see a storm kind of starting up over Tempest Mountain. And this happens while they're out investigating the massacred village. They do have a few of the squatters there helping them, as well as Arthur Monroe is helping the narrator as well. So they decide to hold up in one of the few houses still standing, one of the few houses with a door. It does have a door and one window that both look out onto Maple Hill. So they do bar the window, and as the storm descends. All right, I had to cut for a minute. I had some loud noises outside. So they lock themselves in a house, one door and one window. They bar the door, shutter the window, and they sit down to wait out the storm. It comes through at night, and it gets very dark, so they're sitting in the darkness. Eventually, earlier in the morning, as the storm is kind of eased up, Monroe wants to check outside. He goes to the window, he opens the shutters, and leans out. Still pretty dark. Morning comes, and the narrator gets up, opens the door to let in some light to look around. He sees Monroe is still leaning out the window. So he goes over to get him. He turns around, and this is what he finds. I'm going to read it straight from the story. This is also the last line of part 2. For Arthur Monroe was dead, and on what remained of his chewed and gouged head, there was no longer a face. That is a great last line. I think I prefer part 1 over part 2. Aside from that great scene at the end and the repeated trash talking of the mountain folk, not really a whole lot happened in this part. I think in part 1 really set the story up. I think the nature writing by HPL is great and sets up the atmosphere. And then the big scene in the mansion with the shadow on the chimney tops this last scene, I think. But I did still enjoy this section. I think and reading it serially like I am, I'm pretty excited to see what the narrator will find out about the lurking fear and about the area in the next installment. So I do think this is a pretty effective serialization or serialized story so far. I'm looking forward to the next part. That next part will be published in Homebrew of March 1923. It'll be out next month. I'll make a video about it. Until then, a couple things I'm working on. I am currently rereading the story The Last Feast of Harlequin by Thomas Ligotti. It's one of my favorite of his works, and I'll do a video on it, and it will go in my greatest horror story playlist of all time. I'm also still reading King Sorrow by Joe Hill. I showed that in an earlier video. I'm taking my time on it. It's a really long book. I'm not rushing through it. So one day in the future, there might be a video on it if I like it. I'm also thinking about doing a top 10 Lovecraft stories for beginners. That video will be out sometime. So we'll just see how it goes. So that's it for this one. What do you think of The Lurking Fear? Please let me know. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.